I want you to imagine for a moment that you are standing alone in a wide open space just before dawn. There is no noise, no demand to think the right way, no pressure to become better. There is only a very deep and very real silence. The darkness at this moment is not frightening. It does not threaten you. It feels like an ancient curtain waiting to be gently lifted. And then, without fanfare, without effort, a thin line of light appears on the horizon. That light does not chase the darkness away. The darkness simply dissolves. When I share this with you, I am not speaking about the sun in the sky. I am speaking about something far more familiar. That light lives within you. It has never left. It does not come because you are more worthy than yesterday. It does not appear because today you think more positively. It is there because it is your nature. Through many years of teaching, I have learned that people do not truly suffer from a lack of light. They suffer because they believe the light is somewhere far away in another time, in a better version of themselves. Because of that belief, they grow tired. They strive. They blame themselves. They think that if they are not at peace, then they must have done something wrong. The truth is much simpler. You are not waiting for the light to arrive. You are waking up to it. Inner light is not a reward for good behavior. It is not a trophy for those who practice well. It is the starting point. It is the substance that made you. I want you to slow your breath and let this settle. The light within you is not fragile. It is not extinguished by betrayal, by failure, by exhaustion, or by moments when you feel slower than others. It does not disappear when you feel sad. It does not retreat when you doubt. The sun does not ask the clouds for permission to rise. And your spirit does not need your wounds to allow it to shine. There will be days when your faith feels thin. There will be days when fear speaks louder than wisdom. I do not deny that. But I tell you with all the certainty that comes from lived experience that even on those days the light has not gone anywhere. It is only covered. And being covered is never the same as being lost. When you begin to see yourself from this place, something quiet and profound happens. You stop searching for reassurance outside yourself. You stop trying to prove your worth. You begin to radiate instead of strain. And that radiance is not a performance. It is permission. You allow yourself to be who you are without fixing, without hiding, without comparing. You were not born to become ordinary by the standards of the world. You were born to live in alignment with your true nature. And that nature, whether you remember it or forget, it has always been light. When you begin to realize that the light has never left you, a very natural question arises. If the light has always been here, why do I still feel lost, exhausted, and sometimes empty? I asked myself this many years ago, not as a teacher, but as a human being learning how to live in alignment with the truth within me. And the answer did not come from books, but from simple observation. People do not suffer because they lack light. They suffer because they have turned away from it for too long. Inner light does not force you to feel better immediately. It does not demand that you remove every difficult emotion before it can be present. It simply waits for you to turn back and look. When you do, even for a brief moment, you realize that what exhausts you is not your circumstances, but the constant effort to be someone other than yourself. Many people have been taught that if they cannot stay positive, if they still feel sad, afraid, or doubtful, then they must be doing something wrong spiritually. This belief causes them to judge themselves whenever they feel weak. But I say this to you clearly and with certainty. Light does not require a perfect emotional state to exist. It is not offended by your exhaustion. It does not withdraw when you feel discouraged. It remains steady like a sun that never stops shining, no matter how thick the clouds become. You were taught to fear your downward moments, to fix them quickly, to hide them. But the truth is that even in those moments, the light within you is still doing its work. It does not disappear when you are weak. It only becomes harder to see because you are viewing yourself through fear and expectation. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself this. Recently, what has been draining you the most? Not what is happening outside, but what you are trying so hard to be. Are you holding an image of strength while inside you deeply need rest? Are you trying to prove that you are fine when what you really need is quiet? If so, you are not wrong. You have simply forgotten that you do not need permission to be yourself. Thank you for staying with this question until now. Inner light does not come to make you into a perfect version. It comes to remind you that you are already whole enough to begin living honestly. When you stop trying to fix yourself through pressure, a very deep relief appears. You no longer have to monitor your emotions. You allow them to come and go like clouds passing through the sky. And in that permission, you begin to feel a very quiet kind of strength. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. I have seen this again and again in the lives of many people. When they stop trying to rise above themselves, they begin to stand more upright. When they stop fearing that they are not good enough, they begin to live with more kindness toward themselves and others. Light does not need you to defeat darkness. It only needs you to stop believing that darkness has the right to define you. Perhaps even now you still feel doubtful. Perhaps you think these words sound comforting, but your life still feels tangled. I do not deny that. I only want you to understand that confusion is not proof of spiritual failure. It is often a sign that you have lived too long according to beliefs that no longer fit who you truly are. Light does not ask you to move faster. It invites you to pause. Not to give up, but to remember where you are walking from. When you remember that your nature is light, you begin to live differently in a natural way. You speak more slowly. You react less. You choose from a quieter place within. And these changes, though small, will gradually create a different life. I want to thank you for listening all the way to the end. Not because you need to believe immediately, but because you gave yourself permission to hear a voice that does not push you. A voice that simply reminds you that you are not broken. You are not behind. You do not lack light. You are just learning how to turn back toward it. There is a very common misunderstanding I have seen in most adults who are trying to live better lives. They believe that if they still feel doubt, discouragement, or days when they do not want to get out of bed, then something must be wrong with their spiritual life. They look at the darkness within themselves and conclude that the light has left. But that is a rushed conclusion, and it does not align with how the mind works, nor with spiritual truth. Darkness is never evidence of the absence of light. It is only evidence that light is being covered. And being covered is not the same as being taken away. I want you to hold this firmly because so much suffering does not come from circumstances, but from how people interpret their inner states. When you wake up on a heavy morning, when your heart feels weighed down for no clear reason, it is easy to conclude that you have lost your way. But very often the reality is that you are right in the middle of awakening. Because only when light is close does darkness become that visible. No one sees shadows without light shining on them. I have learned that days of doubt are not enemies of faith. They are invitations to shift your foundation. When you rely on emotions to confirm your worth, every emotional low will feel frightening. But when you begin to ground yourself in principle, you understand that emotions are just weather while your being is the sky. There are sorrows that arrive without warning. There are old memories that return just when you thought you had moved past them. This does not mean you have failed. It means deeper layers are being brought up to be healed. Light is not afraid of these depths. It shines there not to judge, but to reveal. Many people are afraid to look directly at their sadness because they think it will pull them deeper. But what traps people is not feeling sadness. It is identifying with it. When you say, I am sad, you are still the observer. But when you say, I am a failure, I am weak, you hand over the authority to define yourself to a temporary state. Inner light never agrees with that identification. It does not argue with you, but it does not confirm false conclusions either. It remains there quietly waiting for you to look at yourself from a higher place. And the moment you do, even for 1 second, you will feel a shift that is small but real. I am not saying that light will instantly erase all pain. I am saying that light changes your relationship with pain. You no longer run from it, and you no longer let it command you. You begin to listen to it as a signal, not as a sentence. When you allow yourself to stay with emotions without rushing to conclusions about who you are, something important happens. Emotions begin to release themselves. They no longer have to shout to be noticed. Many pains last not because they are strong, but because they have never been seen in the light of understanding. I want you to know that no emotion is powerful enough to extinguish the light within you. Emotions come and go. Light remains. When you stop judging yourself by your bad days, you begin to build a stronger foundation for your life. A foundation that does not shake every time your mood changes. This is especially important for those who carry responsibility. You may be used to having to be strong, to be fine, to keep going. And because of that, you do not allow yourself to be weak. But it is that lack of permission that exhausts you. Light does not require you to always stand tall. It allows you to sit down when needed without losing dignity. Perhaps you are listening to these words and thinking that you have tried many times already, that you have tried to stay positive, but life still feels messy. I am not advising you to be more positive. I am inviting you to be more honest. Honest about what is present without forgetting the deeper truth of who you are. That truth is this: no matter how tired you are, no matter how confused you feel, no matter what stage of life you are in, the light is still present. It does not need you to understand everything. It only asks you to stop condemning yourself for not understanding yet. When you begin to treat yourself with the patience that light has always held for you, something very quiet happens. Outer life may not change immediately, but the way you walk through it does. And that change is where real healing begins. You do not need to defeat darkness. You only need to stop giving it the authority to decide who you are. Light never asks you to prove anything. It only invites you to remember. And each time you remember, even briefly, you are taking a steady step on the path back to yourself. When people begin to remember that light is their nature and not a reward, a very heavy pressure quietly falls away. The pressure to be special. The pressure to shine in a way others approve of. The pressure to prove that they are living correctly, deeply, and with value. I have seen this pressure exhaust people more than their original pain ever did. You do not need to become special in order to live in alignment with the light within you. Light does not require you to stand out. It does not care whether you are seen or not. It only cares whether you are being true to your nature. When light is turned into a goal to achieve, people begin to perform. And when they perform for too long, they forget what it feels like to be themselves. Many people talk about shining as something you must do. You must be more confident, more inspiring, more positive. But the radiance I am speaking of does not come from effort. It comes from permission. You allow yourself to stop hiding, to stop bending, to stop constantly adjusting to fit the expectations of others. And when you stop doing those things, something very natural begins to appear. Radiance is not a performance. It does not need an audience. It is like the scent of a flower. A flower does not try to smell good. It is simply faithful to its nature. And that faithfulness creates its attraction. Human beings are the same. When you stop trying to be acceptable, you begin to be present. There is something very important I want you to understand. You were not born to live as a copy of anyone else. Not of your family. Not of society. Not even of spiritual figures you admire. You were born to live according to the fingerprint of your own soul. And that fingerprint cannot be copied, compared, or measured by common standards. When you compare the way you shine to the way others shine, you leave your center. And each time you leave your center, you weaken yourself. Not because you are lacking, but because you are trying to live on energy that does not belong to you. Light does not flow when you try to be someone else. It flows when you return to your own place. I have met many people with deep capacity, natural kindness, and a very beautiful sensitivity, yet they believe these qualities are weaknesses. They think that to have value they must be harder, sharper, more visible. And in trying to become that, they slowly move away from what makes them precious. Light does not ask you to trade your nature for recognition. It asks you to protect your nature long enough for it to speak on its own. When you stop forcing yourself to shine according to an ideal image, a deep relief appears. You no longer have to monitor every word you say. You no longer have to explain your emotions to make them acceptable. You allow yourself to be fully present even when you are not perfect. And in that accepted imperfection, light begins to spread in a very real way. Radiance does not need to be learned. It needs to be remembered. Remember that you did not come here to impress. You came here to live truthfully. And living truthfully is often much quieter than what the world calls success. But that quiet carries a strength that does not need to prove itself. I want you to notice this. People who truly have deep influence are often not the ones who speak the most. They are the ones who stand the most firmly. They do not need to convince you that they are at peace. You feel it when you are near them. Their presence slows your breath. It reminds you that you do not need to strain. That is real radiance. When you allow yourself to shine from your nature, you also allow others to do the same. You do not force anyone to change. You do not need to teach anyone how to live. Your presence itself becomes an invitation, a very gentle but very real invitation that each person can return to their own center. You may still worry that if you do not try to stand out, you will be forgotten. I understand that fear, but I want to tell you with the certainty of experience, what belongs to you will not pass you by. You do not need to chase recognition. When you live in alignment with your nature, whether recognition comes or not is no longer decisive. You are standing on deeper ground. Light does not require you to speak all the time. Sometimes silence in the right place is the most powerful way of shining. Not silence from fear, but silence from knowing you do not need to react in order to exist. You know who you are. And from that knowing, you act when needed, speak when appropriate, and rest when tired without guilt. When you stop turning your life into a project that must be optimized, you begin to live like a human being who is breathing. And in that natural rhythm, light flows evenly, not rushed, not interrupted, not controlled. I want you to carry this with you. You do not need to become different in order to be worthy. You do not need to reach some state before you are allowed to live truthfully. Right here, with everything you have, light is still present. And each time you choose to be a little more honest with yourself, you allow that light to spread a little further. It is not spectacular, but it is steady. And what is steady is what truly changes a human life. I want to make this clear from the beginning so there is no confusion in your mind. When I speak about Christ consciousness, I am not talking about a religion, a doctrine, or an image to worship from a distance. I am speaking about a very practical way of living. A state where a person stops reacting from wounds and begins to act from principle. Over many years, I have seen many people walk away from spiritual life, not because they lost faith, but because they grew tired of feeling that they had to become better in order to be accepted. They believed the spiritual path was a list of requirements. Be kinder. Be more positive. Forgive faster. Love more. And in trying to meet those demands, they unknowingly turned light into a new kind of pressure. Christ consciousness does not work this way. It does not come to demand that you become someone else. It comes to help you live as who you truly are, without being distorted by fear, shame, or borrowed patterns. It does not remove responsibility. Instead, it gives you a very healthy kind of responsibility. The responsibility to live from truth rather than from reflex. When inner light begins to be recognized, something very subtle happens. Your mind becomes clearer, not because you think more, but because there is less noise. Your heart becomes softer, not because you are weaker, but because you no longer need to defend yourself all the time. You begin to speak truth without condemning. You begin to see mistakes without humiliating yourself. This is where Christ consciousness becomes very practical. It does not give you a life without mistakes. It gives you a life where mistakes are no longer a sentence. You learn from them, adjust your direction, and continue without carrying the weight of self-accusation. I have seen many people believe that living with spiritual awareness means ignoring bad habits, negative thoughts, or imperfect reactions. But ignoring only pushes things deeper. Christ consciousness does not ignore. It illuminates. It shows you clearly that every thought you feed, every belief you protect, every word you repeat is participating in what you emit each day. This is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to return agency to you. When you understand that your life is a continuous emission from within you, stop blaming circumstances. You also stop blindly blaming yourself. You begin to observe, and from observation choice appears. Christ consciousness does not say you must be perfect. It says you must be awake. Awake to notice what you are thinking when no one is listening. Awake to recognize what story you are telling about your life in silence. Awake to understand that not every thought deserves belief, and not every emotion deserves to steer your life. There is a very real difference between responsibility and burden. Burden makes you tense. Responsibility helps you stand upright. When you live from Christ consciousness, you do not carry the feeling that you must fix yourself to meet a standard. You carry the understanding that you are cooperating with a living principle, and that principle always responds accurately to what you nurture within. I want to pause here and invite you in a very simple way. If while listening to this, there is any part of you that feels lighter, clearer, or simply less self-judging, leave a comment. You can write, "I am ready to change." Or if you prefer not to write, much simply leave the number 1. Not for me, for yourself. And thank you for that presence. Because each time you choose to be consciously present, you are reactivating a very deep circuit within you. A circuit that does not operate through force, but through inner consent. Christ consciousness does not require you to leave ordinary life. It enters the most ordinary moments. How you react when you are misunderstood. How you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. How you choose to stay or withdraw when fear appears. There the light is not loud, but it is very clear. When you begin to live from principle rather than reaction, you realize something important. You no longer need to control everything to feel safe. You begin to trust a deeper order at work, not as random magic, but as a gentle and precise law. And when you trust that law not in words, but in how you live, a different kind of peace appears. Not peace because there are no problems, but peace because you no longer lose yourself when problems appear. This is the foundation of real healing, not changing everything outside, but changing where you stand when you look at it. From that place, you are no longer someone pulled around by life. You become someone who is emitting direction. If you sense this even faintly, remember that you do not need to understand everything right now. Light does not ask you to grasp it. It only asks you not to turn away. And each time you choose to turn back toward the quiet truth within you, are living Christ consciousness not as a concept, but as a way of being present. When you begin to live from Christ consciousness, the first thing that changes is not your circumstances, but how you stand within yourself. Many people believe that alignment means always feeling peaceful, clear, and strong. That belief causes many to give up halfway. Alignment is not a feeling. Alignment is an inner position. You can feel sad and still be aligned. You can feel tired and still be aligned. You can even feel afraid and still be aligned. The difference is not which emotion is present, but whether you allow that emotion to drive your life. When you live from alignment, you do not deny emotions, but you also do not give them the authority to decide who you are and where you must go. I want you to understand this clearly. Alignment is not pretending to be fine when you are confused inside. It is also not forcing positivity to make things more comfortable. Alignment is deep honesty with what is happening while not forgetting the principle that supports you. You face the truth of this moment while standing on a deeper ground than the moment itself. Many people live in constant tension because they try to control their emotions. They fear sadness. They fear weakness. They fear days without motivation. But control does not bring peace. It only adds another layer of strain. Alignment does not come from control. It comes from being rightly placed. When you place yourself in principle, you do not need to fix emotions. Emotions regulate themselves when they are no longer judged. A sadness that is allowed dissolves faster than one that is resisted. A fear that is faced weakens faster than one that is suppressed. Light does not force darkness to retreat. It simply remains clear enough that darkness loses its power. I have learned that much of human exhaustion does not come from work or responsibility, but from constantly performing. Performing strength, performing understanding, performing stability. When you perform long enough, you lose contact with your own truth. Alignment is when you stop performing, not to give up, but to breathe in your own rhythm. Living aligned does not make you passive. It makes you more precise. You begin to act from a quiet place instead of from reflex. You begin to speak from clarity instead of from self-defense. You do not need to explain too much or prove yourself constantly. Inner steadiness creates a natural authority, not power over others, but the authority to not be pulled away from yourself. Some days alignment is simply not criticizing yourself when you are tired. Some days alignment is saying no to what drains you even when you fear disappointing others. Some days alignment is accepting that you do not have the answers yet, while trusting that you are being guided. Alignment does not always look good, but it is always real. When you live from alignment, you begin to realize something important. You do not need to rush. Rushing usually comes from fear, from the sense that if you do not act now, you will lose opportunity, position, or value. But principle does not rush. Light does not run. It is present. When you stay with that presence, the decisions you make carry a different quality. They bring less regret, less self-blame, less need to correct later. I am not saying that living aligned will make life easy. I am saying it makes you less shaken. Difficulties still come, but they do not sweep you away. You stand within them without losing your axis. From there, you handle each thing with more clarity. One of the clearest signs of alignment is that you no longer need to convince yourself that you are on the right path. You know with a very quiet sense. Not excitement, not drama, just a silent certainty. When you no longer need to convince yourself, you also stop trying to convince others. Alignment does not make you perfect. It makes you more consistent. What you think, say, and do begin to move in the same direction. Not always perfectly matched, but no longer deeply conflicted. That consistency creates healing energy. First for you, then around you. I want you to remember this. Each time you choose honesty with your inner truth, even in a small way, you return to alignment. Each time you pause before reacting, you return to alignment. Each time you choose principle over old habit, you return to alignment. No big leaps are needed, only steady returns. Light does not ask you to live above your humanity. It invites you to live deeper, deep enough that you are no longer pulled by every small wave, deep enough to know that even when you are unsteady, there is a part of you that remains upright. That part is not loud, but it is real. When you begin to trust that part more than surface fluctuations, a new peace forms. Not peace because there are no waves, but peace because you are no longer afraid of waves. You know what ground you are standing on. From that ground you continue walking, perhaps slower, but much steadier. Alignment is not a destination you reach and keep forever. It is a repeated choice. Each day, each situation, each time you face a familiar reaction. Every time you choose to return to principle, you strengthen a new inner path. A path where light leads and fear does not. If you are listening and feel that you are not living this way yet, be at ease. No one begins from steadiness. We all begin with very clumsy returns. Light does not judge that clumsiness. It recognizes honesty, and from that honesty, all real transformation begins. There is something the modern world deeply lacks, and it is also what many of us are unconsciously searching for. It is not more information, more techniques, or more motivation. It is presence. A presence steady enough to not be pulled by every movement outside. The world does not truly need louder voices. It needs people who can stand still within themselves, people who do not react immediately to every stimulus, people who do not need to prove they are right, people who carry a quiet certainty, not loud but very clear. This presence is not a skill you learn in a few weeks. It is the natural result of no longer abandoning yourself every time circumstances change. When you stop chasing temporary emotions, when you stop letting fear decide the rhythm of your life. I have met people who do not speak much, who do not try to impress, yet when they enter a room the atmosphere changes. Not because they have power, but because they are present. They are not scattered. They are not defensive. They do not carry haste. Their presence naturally slows others down, helps them breathe deeper and feel safer being themselves. This is not magic. It is the effect of living aligned. When there is no major conflict inside you, create less noise outside. You do not need to say you are at peace. Others can feel it. Many people believe that to have influence they must speak more, do more, show more. But deep influence often moves in the opposite direction. It comes from inner consistency, from living by principle even when no one is watching, from choosing honesty over convenience, choosing silence when reaction is unnecessary, choosing action only when it truly matters. Presence does not make you passive, it makes you precise. You stop wasting energy on meaningless arguments. You no longer need to defend your image all the time. You know who you are, so you do not need to prove it. And that creates a very natural kind of gravity. When you live with presence, you also stop being overly concerned with what others think of you. Not because you do not care, but because your roots are placed deeper than approval. You listen to feedback when needed. You adjust when it feels right. But you do not lose yourself just to be accepted. There is great freedom in this. You do not have to move at the pace of the crowd. You can walk at your own rhythm. Slower, perhaps. Less, perhaps. But much truer. And that truth is what the world is longing for, even if it does not know how to name it. Presence does not need a stage. It does not need lights. It shows itself most clearly in very ordinary moments. How you listen when someone speaks. How you pause before reacting. how you choose not to join gossip, even when you could. These small choices repeated over time create a very different field around you. When you carry that presence, you do not live only for yourself. You become an anchor for others. Not through advice, but through how you are. Present. Not rushing to fix. Not rushing to teach. Simply there, with clarity and calm. This is what many people search for in courses, methods, and systems. But the truth is, you cannot buy presence. You can only cultivate it by returning to yourself again and again. When you stop abandoning yourself to chase circumstances, you naturally become trustworthy. Not because you are always right, but because you are consistent. And that consistency creates a foundation others can feel. The world does not need you to be perfect. It needs you real enough to stand still when needed, clear enough to act when the time comes, and brave enough to not be pulled into what does not belong to you. Presence is wordless light. It does not persuade. It does not argue. It simply is. And within that presence, many things quietly rearrange themselves. When you live this way, you do not need to ask what influence you are creating. You only need to ask whether you are staying with the truth inside. If the answer is yes, the rest will take care of itself. There is something many people misunderstand about fear. They believe fear is an enemy that must be destroyed, a weakness that must be overcome, or a system error that must be fixed as quickly as possible. But in the light of spiritual understanding, fear has no power of its own. It is like a shadow. It only exists when something blocks the light. Fear does not create itself. It has no independent source of life. It lives on your attention, on the stories you tell in silence, on the assumptions you accept without questioning. When you believe fear, you lend it your own energy. And when you withdraw that agreement, fear begins to weaken. I am not saying fear will disappear immediately just because you understand this. Understanding with the mind is one thing. Living from that understanding is another. But each time you choose not to react, the moment fear appears, each time you pause long enough to recognize that this is only a signal and not an absolute truth, you place fear back in its proper position. Fear often arrives in very reasonable forms. It carries memories, old experiences, past failures. It speaks in a familiar voice. It offers arguments that sound convincing. Because of that, many people believe they are being wise when they follow fear. What they are actually doing is living from the past while believing they are protecting the future. Inner light does not argue with fear. It does not try to prove fear wrong. It simply stands there clear enough for you to see that fear is not the only voice within you. When light is present, fear loses its central position. It may still appear, but it no longer has control. One of the clearest signs that you are returning to the light is that your body responds differently. When you no longer fully believe the story of fear, your shoulders naturally drop, your breath deepens, your thinking widens. This is not spiritual performance. This is alignment returning. Fear always carries urgency. It pushes you to act immediately, to decide immediately, to fix immediately. But that urgency is not wisdom. It is noise. Light does not rush. Light illuminates. And in that illumination, what needs to be done becomes clear without panic. I want you to remember this. You do not need to fight fear. Each time you fight, you unknowingly confirm that it has power equal to the light. Instead, allow light to do its work. Bring fear into the light of understanding. When you see clearly that fear is only a learned reaction and not your nature, you begin to be free. Right now, fear may still be speaking loudly inside you. It may be reminding you of risks, old wounds, disappointments not yet healed. I am not asking you to silence it. I am simply inviting you to ask one gentle question. Is this voice speaking from principle or from a wound? That single question is enough to create space. And in that space, light has room to appear. Fear does not disappear when you deny it. It dissolves when you stop identifying with it. When you stop saying, "I am a fearful person," and begin saying, "There is fear passing through me." This small shift completely changes the position of power. Inner light does not ask you to be brave by the world's definition. It does not demand that you feel no fear. It simply invites you to remember that you are not defined by what you fear. And when you remember that even if fear still lingers, it no longer leads you. Each time fear appears, it is not a sign that you are going the wrong way. Very often, it is a sign that you are standing near a threshold of change. Light does not avoid these thresholds. It moves through them quietly and steadily. And so do you. You do not need to wait until fear is gone to live rightly. You live rightly and fear adjusts its place. Light does not make fear disappear. It makes fear no longer important. And that is where true freedom begins. When fear is no longer seen as an enemy, something very important begins to reveal itself. Fear does not come to destroy you. It comes to show you where you are placing your trust. Each time fear rises, it is like a signpost, not telling you to turn back, but inviting you to look again at your inner foundation. Many people believe that a spiritual person is someone who no longer feels fear. I have never met such a person. I have only met people who know where their fear comes from and no longer let it rule them. Fear may knock first. That often happens, but it does not have the final word unless you give it that authority. When fear tells you that you are alone, light reminds you that you have never been separated from the source of life. When fear whispers that you are late, light shows you that real time lives in awareness, not on a clock. When fear compares you to others and concludes that you are not enough, light quietly reminds you that what is real cannot be measured by comparison. What matters is not whether fear appears. What matters is where you stand when it does. If you stand in reaction, fear will lead. If you stand in principle, fear becomes background noise. It may still be there, but it is no longer the guide. I want you to notice this in your body. When you stop believing the story of fear even for a few seconds, something shifts. Your breath slows. Your shoulders soften. Your view widens. You no longer feel forced to decide immediately. That moment is not loud, but it is very real. That is when truth returns to the center. Fear always carries urgency. It pushes you to fix, to run, to react. But that urgency does not come from wisdom. It comes from the fear of losing control. Light does not operate through haste. It operates through clarity. When you choose to stay with that clarity, answers often come without effort. I want you to pause here and ask yourself one simple question. Right now, which fear inside you is speaking the loudest? Not to analyze deeply, just to notice. You do not need to share it if you do not want to. But if you feel ready, you can leave a very small sign that you are here and listening. Just one word or simply the number 1. And thank you for having the courage to stay with that question. When you look at fear without panic, a quiet shift happens. You begin to remember that you are not the voice in your mind, but the one who is listening to it. When you remember this, power naturally returns to its rightful place. Fear does not make you weak. Believing it completely does. Each time you choose principle over reflex, you build a very quiet strength. Not dramatic, not visible, but lasting. You do not need to wait for fear to disappear to live rightly. You live rightly and fear steps back into its proper role. It becomes a signal to wake up, not a command to obey. If you carry this with you, future moments of fear will no longer shake you as before. You may still tremble, but you do not collapse. You may still hesitate, but you do not turn away from yourself. And in those moments, the light within you becomes very clear. We will continue to go deeper because when fear no longer holds authority, a larger question appears. If I am not being led by fear, then what is truly operating my life? And the answer begins in a very basic place, in thought. When fear no longer holds the central position, you begin to realize something very basic yet rarely lived. Your life is not first directed by circumstances, but by thought. Not passing thoughts, but the patterns of thought you allow to stay and repeat within your mind. Many people believe they are just thinking, casually thinking, to reduce worry, thinking to prepare for the worst. But thought is never neutral. Every thought you nurture carries a direction. Over time, that direction becomes lived experience. This is not abstract philosophy. It is a law, a gentle but precise law. You do not only have thoughts, you are emitting them. And what you emit consistently becomes the atmosphere you live in. If your thoughts revolve around lack, vigilance, and self-doubt, your life will feel tense, even when nothing dramatic is happening outside. When your thoughts begin to rest on trust, clarity, and principle, your life slowly takes on a different rhythm. Many people live as if thought were weather. They believe thoughts come and go randomly. That mood decides how they think, that they have little choice. The deeper truth is this: you are not the weather. You are the sky. And within that sky, thoughts are clouds passing through. You can learn to observe them instead of being carried by them. When you are not aware of your thoughts, you are easily guided by borrowed ideas. Ideas from family, from society, from old failures, from stories repeated so often they feel like truth. These thoughts run quietly like background software. You do not see them yet. You live by them every day. This is why many people change circumstances but do not change their inner life. They change jobs, relationships, environments, yet the same sense of stuckness follows. Not because they chose the wrong place, but because they carried the same thought patterns everywhere. The law of mind does not respond to what you say when you feel inspired. It responds to what you believe when no one is watching. It responds to the patterns you repeat when you are tired, discouraged, or unguarded. In those moments, the dominant thought reveals itself. And that thought is what continues writing your life story. I am not saying this to make you anxious. I am saying it to return your agency. When you see that thought is the cause, you stop blaming outcomes. You also stop vaguely blaming yourself. You begin doing something very simple and very powerful. You observe what you are thinking when life does not go as expected. Not to judge yourself, but to notice. To notice what story you are telling, what belief you are repeating, where you are standing when you look at circumstances. From that noticing, choice appears. Changing thought is not forcing positivity. It is shifting the center of attention. You do not need to argue with every negative thought. You only need to ask one quiet question. Does this thought reflect principle, or does it reflect an old fear? If it does not reflect the deeper truth of who you are, you do not need to feed it. You can let it pass. Many people believe that without vigilant thinking, they will become naive or unprepared. But clarity does not come from worry. It comes from awareness. When you live from principle, you are not unrealistic. You are very grounded. But it is a groundedness, not obsessed with worst-case outcomes. Right thinking does not make you careless. It makes you steady. When you are steady, you handle problems better. You do not react from panic. You do not make decisions just to escape discomfort. You choose from a deeper place. Those choices, though imperfect, often take you further than old reflexes. There is something important to remember. Thought is not changed by willpower. It is changed by attention. What you attend to grows. What you stop feeding weakens. You do not need to fight old thoughts. You only need to stop nourishing them with unconscious attention. When you begin to notice your thoughts gently without judgment, you will see many patterns. Thoughts that appear whenever you are tired. Old stories that return when you feel rejected. Familiar beliefs that rise when you approach the edge of comfort. These are not enemies. They are traces of old habits asking to continue. Here you have a choice. You can keep living by them, or you can lay a new foundation, not by denying the past, but by not allowing it to decide the future. The law of mind does not ask for perfection. It asks for consistency. One aligned thought repeated steadily is stronger than 100 moments of forced positivity. Each time you patiently return to principle, you build a new inner structure, one that does not collapse whenever emotion shifts. As that structure forms, you begin to see life respond differently. Not always as you wish, but with more clarity, less chaos, less repetition of old lessons. You begin to feel that you are no longer only reacting to life, but participating in shaping it from within. Thought is the first creative act. Everything else follows. When you reclaim authorship of your thoughts, you do not become more tense. You become freer, because you are no longer driven by unseen stories. You know where you stand. From there, you continue walking. We will continue because as you reclaim this inner authority, something natural appears. You begin to see that not every desire you have is misguided. There are deeper longings waiting to be seen in the right light. When you begin to realize that thought is the cause, and not circumstances, a very common reaction appears. You want to change quickly. You want to fix old thoughts immediately. You want to control your mind better. But that urgency is only an old habit wearing a new mask. And it does not lead to freedom. Thought is not changed through force. It is changed through conscious attention. This may sound simple, but it requires real maturity. Because instead of fighting what is present, you learn to look directly at it without judgment. Many people believe that when they notice a negative thought, they must remove it right away. But when you try to eliminate a thought through tension, you unknowingly give it more energy. You signal to the mind that this thought is dangerous and urgent, and the mind holds on to it to protect you. The path of light moves differently. When an old thought appears, you do not argue with it. You also do not identify with it. You simply observe. You quietly say to yourself, "This is a familiar pattern." And that alone places you one step outside of it. Real change begins at that moment. The moment you are no longer pulled into the story running in your head. The moment you realize that you are the one noticing the thought, not the thought itself. I have seen many people try to live rightly and become exhausted because they turn their inner life into a battlefield. Every wrong thought feels like failure. Every difficult emotion feels like regression. But light does not work that way. It does not test you. It does not grade you. It simply illuminates. When you observe thought gently, you begin to notice clear cycles. Some thoughts appear only when you are tired. Some beliefs rise when you feel judged. Some stories start running when you are about to step beyond comfort. These are not flaws. They are habits. Habits are not broken through force. They are replaced through consistency. Each time an old thought appears and you do not feed it with unconscious attention, you weaken it. Each time you return to a simple principle instead of continuing the old story, you lay a new brick. The principle here is clear. You are not your thoughts. You are the source of thought. When you forget this, you are pulled along. When you remember this, you begin to lead. There will be days when you observe clearly. There will be days when you forget and fall back into old reflex. This does not mean failure. It means learning. Light does not withdraw when you forget. It waits for you to remember. I want you to understand this, so you do not add more pressure to yourself. Returning to principle is not usually a big act. It is often very small. The moment you pause before criticizing yourself, the moment you notice an old story and choose not to continue, the moment you admit you are tired instead of pretending to be strong, These small moments repeated create a deep change, not instantly but steadily, and steadiness is the sign of real transformation. I want to invite you into this in a very simple way, not through big promises or dramatic resolve, only through a small sign of willingness. If you are listening and feel a desire to live more consciously with your thoughts, leave a comment. You can write, "I am ready to change," or if you prefer, just leave the number 1. Not for me, for you. And thank you for that presence. Each time you choose conscious presence, you create a pause in the old chain of reflex. And in that pause, light has space to work. New thought does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be rightly oriented. When you choose a thought that reflects principle, even a simple one, and hold it gently, you are building a new structure in the mind, one that does not collapse when emotions shift. You do not need to control every thought. You only need to stop giving leadership to thoughts that do not reflect the truth of who you are. When you do this, life begins to change naturally, not loudly, not through force, but clearly. You may think this sounds slow, and it is slower than old reflex. But it is much faster than repeating the same lesson for years. The path of light does not rush, but it does not wander. As you live from conscious attention, you will notice fewer old situations pulling you in, fewer extreme reactions, less self-blame. And when self-blame softens, you have more energy to live rightly. This does not make you into someone else. It returns you to who you were before borrowed stories took over, before old fears led the way, before you felt the need to constantly prove your worth. Thought does not need to be perfect for light to work. It only needs to be placed correctly. And each time you remember this, even briefly, you take a very real step forward. We will continue because when thought begins to find its proper place, something important appears. You begin to look at your desires through a different light, no longer as wrong or suspicious, but as signals waiting to be understood correctly. When you begin to observe your thoughts instead of being pulled by them, something very clear slowly reveals itself. Most of the stuckness people experience does not come from a lack of opportunity, ability, or luck. It comes from repetition, repeating the same way of thinking, repeating the same reactions, repeating the same inner story and waiting for a different result. There is no truly new stuckness if the thought pattern remains old. This is not meant to discourage you. It is actually freeing. Because if the issue is repetition, then the key is not trying harder, but recognizing what you are repeating. Many people say their life is stuck, but when you look closely, they are not stuck. They are running a very familiar circle. Each time a new opportunity appears, they respond with an old fear. Each time hope arises, they quickly return to the familiar conclusion that disappointment will follow. Then they use that outcome as proof that life does not change. Light does not blame you for this repetition. It simply shines on it so you can see clearly. Because only when you see clearly can you choose differently. Not by forcing positive thinking, but by no longer following the old momentum. I often say the mind is like a garden. If you do not tend it, what is familiar will grow first. Not because it is good, but because it already has roots. Old thoughts, old beliefs, old reactions are like weed. They do not need your permission. They only need your inattention. Tending the garden of the mind is not heavy work. It does not require watching every thought. It requires enough presence to notice when an old pattern is returning. When you notice, you can choose not to keep feeding it. Some loops are very subtle. For example, you may say you want to change, but deep inside you hold a belief that change will make you unsafe. So when a real opportunity appears, you delay. Not because you are lazy, but because part of you is still protecting an old identity. Light does not judge that part. It simply invites you to see it. When you begin to see these loops, do not rush to fix them. Do not conclude that something is wrong with you. Just see. Seeing clearly is already a powerful act. It interrupts the chain of reaction. It creates a gap, and in that gap a new choice can appear. Many people feel frustrated because they believe that once they understood, change immediately. But understanding is one thing. Releasing momentum is another. Momentum does not dissolve in a day. It dissolves gradually when you stop feeding it energy. Each time you notice yourself repeating an old thought and do not continue it, you create a small crack in that loop. Each time you slow your reaction not to suppress it, but to choose the loop weakens a little more. These small changes repeated create real transformation. You do not need to tear down the entire old garden. You only need to begin nurturing new seeds. Seeds of trust, of clarity, of principle. When these seeds are cared for long enough, they naturally take the place of what no longer fits. It is important not to confuse slowness with failure. Loops are not undone by one big decision, but by many small choices made consistently. Light does not ask you to escape every loop at once. It only invites you to stop sleeping inside them. As you live with this awareness, life may feel slower, but in truth, it is becoming more precise. You are no longer running in circles. You begin to move in a new direction, even if it is faint at first. That direction is not confirmed immediately by outer results. It is confirmed by the inner sense that you are no longer betraying yourself. Nothing exhausts a person more than repeating a life they already know is not aligned with them. And nothing heals more than the moment they realize they can stop. Not to give up, but to change direction. When you stop in this way, light has space to guide. Not with loud answers, but with very clear small steps. Each small step taken with honesty leads you out of the old loop in the most sustainable way. You are not stuck. You are being invited to see an old pattern, so you no longer have to live inside it. That invitation, even when uncomfortable, always carries a great possibility. The possibility of living differently without becoming someone else. When you begin to see old loops and stop following them unconsciously, something very interesting starts to appear. The deep desires you once doubted, suppressed, or judged as wrong begin to speak again. And the familiar reaction for many people is fear. They believe that if they allow desire to exist, they will become selfish, greedy, or drift away from the spiritual path. But I want to tell you this clearly. Desire is not a sin. Desire is direction. It is a sign that life is seeking fuller expression through you. The issue is not whether desire exists, but where it comes from and where you allow it to lead. Some desires are born from fear, from a sense of lack, from the need to prove something. These desires are always rushed, tense, and never satisfied. But there are also desires that are very quiet. They do not shout. They return steadily. They do not pull you away from the present moment, but invite you into a more honest version of yourself. Many people were taught to distrust their desires, to sacrifice, to accept, to settle. But when desire is suppressed for too long, it does not disappear. It only distorts. It becomes bitterness, comparison, quiet dissatisfaction. Light does not teach you to kill desire. It teaches you to understand it correctly. I want you to think of a seed. A seed does not apologize for wanting to grow. It does not wait for permission from the world to rise. It carries a living pattern within it, and that pattern pulls it toward the light. If a seed is buried too deeply in fear and denial, it does not become more virtuous. It simply rots. Human beings are the same. True desire does not pull you away from principle. It draws you deeper into it. It does not destabilize you. It gives you direction. When a desire returns again and again, even after you try to ignore it, there is a good chance it is not temptation. It is an invitation. What matters is that you do not rush to act on desire nor rush to suppress it. Listen, ask one quiet question. Does this desire come from truth or from lack? Is it inviting me to expand or trying to fill an old emptiness? That single question is enough to separate light from illusion. When desire is seen through the light of understanding, its quality changes. It no longer pushes. It becomes clear. It begins to guide you toward more responsible choices rather than impulsive actions. Desire that is illuminated does not destroy life. It reorganizes life around a deeper order. You may have abandoned very real desires in yourself out of fear of judgment, fear of being seen as ambitious, fear of being seen as not spiritual enough. But light does not ask you to live smaller to be accepted. It asks you to live at your true size, and that size can only be felt from within. When you allow yourself to acknowledge deeper desires, a new energy appears. Not the energy of tension, but the energy of focus. You begin to see what truly matters and what no longer needs your attention. You become less scattered, less driven by borrowed goals. That focus creates a very practical strength. I am not saying every desire must be pursued immediately. I am saying every desire deserves honest listening. When you listen without judgment, you give light space to work, and light always knows how to refine. It keeps what is true. It lets what is false fall away on its own. Desire is not what pulls you off the path. When understood correctly, it is how the path calls you by name. And when you are no longer afraid of your deeper desires, you begin to walk with a new sense of wholeness. Not by moving faster, but by moving in the right direction. We will continue because when desire is seen clearly, another important step appears. Not all desires are the same. Some need to be refined so they can become truly aligned with who you are becoming. When desire is understood as direction rather than temptation, a deeper stage of maturity begins. This is refinement. Not every desire needs to be carried out in its raw form. Some desires need to be clarified so they can become truly aligned with the person you are becoming. Refinement is not suppression. It is also not compromise. Refinement means bringing desire into the light of principle to see what remains when fear and ego are no longer leading. When you do this, you do not lose desire. You simply remove the noise around it. Many people act on desire without understanding the motive beneath it. They chase a goal out of fear of being left behind. They pursue an image because they want recognition. They seek a position because they believe only then will they be enough. Desires like these always carry tension. And even when they are fulfilled, they rarely bring deep satisfaction. But when a desire is refined, its quality changes. It is no longer rushed. It no longer pushes. It becomes quiet but steady. It does not need you to prove anything. It simply invites you into a more honest expression of who you are. Refinement happens when you are willing to ask difficult questions. Why do I want this? What am I trying to avoid? What emptiness am I trying to fill? These questions are not meant to make you doubt yourself. They are meant to return you to clarity. When desire passes through clarity, it begins to connect with responsibility. It is no longer I want, therefore I must have. It becomes if I choose this, who am I willing to become? This is where desire turns into a path rather than a destination. Some desires, when refined, will change shape. You may realize that what you thought you needed was only the surface expression of a deeper need. Not money, but safety. Not recognition, but belonging. Not control, but trust. When you touch the root need, many surface desires fall away on their own. Light does not take your dreams away. It makes them true. True to your values. True to your rhythm. True to who you are becoming. When a desire has passed through this refinement, you can move toward it without losing yourself. Refinement also teaches you when to wait. Not from fear, but from sensing that the timing is not ripe. This is very different from delay. Delay comes from avoidance. Waiting comes from listening. These two states feel very different in the body. I want you to pause here and ask yourself one thing. Right now, is there a desire that has been repeating in you for many years that you have never truly looked at the motive behind? You do not need to answer anyone. Just notice. And if you wish to mark your presence, you can leave a short word or simply the number 1. Thank you for staying with that question. When you dare to look at desire without judgment, you do not become weaker. You become more precise. You stop wasting energy on goals that are not yours. You begin investing in directions that can nourish you over time. Refinement does not make your path shorter, but it makes it straighter. Less detours, less regret, less self-betrayal. Most importantly, you no longer have to force yourself forward when you are empty inside. When desire has been refined, you can act without strain. You can move forward without comparison. You can accept the process without losing respect for yourself. This is a very grounded kind of spiritual maturity, not abstract, not dramatic, but steady. Light does not ask you to want less. It invites you to want rightly. When you want rightly, your actions naturally align. Less inner conflict, less pulling apart, more peace even as you move forward. We will continue because when desire has been refined, there is one more essential place to touch. How you meet pain and the things you have tried to avoid. Because no path of real growth passes without this encounter. When desire has been refined, when you are no longer driven by distorted motives, something unavoidable appears on the path of maturity. Pain, not pain as punishment, but as a doorway. Many people stop here, not because they are weak, but because they misunderstand what pain means. Most of us were taught to avoid pain at all costs, to avoid loss, to avoid sadness, to avoid disappointment, to avoid facing what is still unhealed within us. But what is avoided does not disappear. It only moves deeper, operating quietly and shaping life from behind the scenes. Pain does not come to break you. It comes when something inside you can no longer be ignored, when an old belief no longer fits, when an old way of living has reached its limit. Pain is a signal that you are standing at the edge of a shift, whether you recognize it or not. Light does not remove pain. It changes how you meet it. When you meet pain from reflex, you contract. You try to escape. You blame yourself. You blame others. But when you meet pain from principle, you listen. You stay. You allow it to say what needs to be said. And in that allowing, pain begins to change its role. Many people believe healing means no longer feeling pain. But real healing means you are no longer afraid of pain. You no longer panic when it appears. You no longer conclude that something is wrong with you because you are hurting. You understand that pain is part of the process of returning to truth. Some pain is born from living out of alignment with yourself for too long. Some wounds come from repeatedly crossing your own boundaries. Some injuries appear when you have to perform in order to be loved. These pains do not need heavy labels or endless analysis. They need to be seen honestly and held long enough in the light. When you stop running from pain, you begin to hear what it is pointing to. It may be telling you to slow down, to change how you treat yourself, to acknowledge that you have moved too far away from what is real. Pain does not shout if you listen early. It becomes intense only when it is ignored. I have seen many people try to cover unhealed wounds with positive thinking. They speak beautiful words, but inside they remain exhausted, irritable, empty. Light does not work like a curtain. It works like illumination. When light shines on pain, it is not to expose you but to release you. Staying with pain does not mean drowning in it. It means not abandoning yourself when it appears. You do not need to understand everything right away. You only need enough presence to stop condemning yourself. When condemnation stops, something softens. That softening opens the door to real healing. Pain, when met with presence, does not last as long as you fear. It is like a wave. If you resist it, it's harder. If you stay, it passes. When it passes, it often leaves behind a new clarity, not about the world, but about yourself. Some lessons cannot be learned from books. They are learned through lived experience, through moments when you no longer rely on old roles. Pain is where these lessons appear, not to punish you, but to mature you in a way that cannot be imitated. When you move through pain with awareness, you do not become cold. You become deeper. You understand others more. You judge less. You stop speaking in empty phrases. Your compassion comes not from theory, but from having been there and not turning away from yourself. Light does not promise a path without tears. It promises that tears are not meaningless. That each time you are brave enough to stay with truth, even when it hurts, you are moving in the right direction. Not faster, but truer. When you no longer see pain as an enemy, you stop wasting energy fighting yourself. You use that energy to listen, to adjust, to walk with greater integrity. That integrity is the deepest form of healing. We are nearing the final part. Because after pain is seen correctly, after desire is refined, after thought is placed back in its proper position, something very quiet, yet very powerful appears. Forgiveness. Not as a moral duty, but as an act of liberation. I want to speak to you about forgiveness in the way I have learned it through my own journey. Not as a moral demand, not as a spiritual obligation, but as a very practical act of liberation. Forgiveness is not something you do for others. It is something you do to return freedom to yourself. For many years I have seen people carry old stories like stones in their hearts. They say they have moved on, that they have forgotten, that they are stronger now. But whenever a memory is touched, whenever a similar situation appears, their body tightens, their voice changes, and the energy immediately becomes heavy. This shows that the wound has not been released. It has only been covered by endurance. Forgiveness is not the denial of pain. It does not say that what happened was right. It does not require reconciliation or staying close to those who caused harm. Forgiveness does one thing only. It ends the past's control over your present. I have learned that what binds people is not memory, but unresolved emotion attached to memory. You can remember what happened without pain, but when the emotion remains, memory becomes a knot. That knot shapes how you think, how you choose, how you trust. Forgiveness does not come from trying to be noble. It comes from a deep exhaustion with carrying old weight. There is a very quiet moment when a person realizes that holding on to resentment no longer protects them. It only makes them heavier. In that moment, a door opens. When I speak of forgiveness, I am not only speaking about forgiving others. I am speaking about forgiving yourself, forgiving the version of you that did not know better, forgiving choices made in fear, forgiving the times you stayed too long, stayed silent too often, or reacted in ways you no longer respect. If you do not forgive yourself, you will keep punishing yourself by repeating the same patterns. Many people believe that if they forgive, they will lose power. The truth is the opposite. Resentment is a false kind of power. It feels like control, but it drains energy. Forgiveness is the return of agency. You are no longer pulled back to an old moment every time something is triggered. Forgiveness does not need to be dramatic. It does not need grand declarations. Sometimes it is simply a quiet decision. I am not carrying this anymore. I choose not to let this story define me. That decision, when held steadily, begins to change how you show up in life. There are people you may not be able to forgive yet. That is okay. Forgiveness cannot be forced. It happens when you are ready. But there is always one thing you can do. You can stop feeding the old story through unconscious repetition. Each time you retell it with the same emotion, you give it more life. Each time you pause, breathe, and choose not to continue that path, you loosen the bond. Forgiveness does not make you forget. It allows you to remember from a higher place. You are no longer inside the wound. You are looking at it. From that position, you see more clearly. Not to judge, but to understand. To understand that people act from the level of awareness they have at the time. This does not excuse. It explains. And explanation opens the way to release. When forgiveness begins to happen, you will notice a clear shift in your body. Tension softens. Breath deepens. The mind circles less. You no longer need to prove that you were right. You no longer need to defend an old identity. You begin to live from the present instead of from memory. I want to say this clearly. Forgiveness is not the end of the journey. It is the clearing that allows you to move forward lighter. When you no longer carry old stones, your energy becomes available for what is new. Not because you are trying to attract something, but because you are no longer blocking the natural flow of life. In the light of Christ consciousness, forgiveness is an intelligent act. It recognizes that nothing is healed by prolonging suffering. Nothing is fixed by repeating resentment. And nothing is freed by continuing to identify as a victim. When you forgive, you are not saying that what happened did not matter. You are saying that your present matters more. You are saying, I choose to live from principle, not from reflex. That choice carries a very quiet but very deep strength. I have seen people change completely when they truly forgive. Not because their lives became perfect, but because they were no longer bound to the past. They think more clearly. They choose more wisely. They no longer need to stay on constant defense. And in that lack of defense, light flows naturally. If you are listening and feel something inside you softening, know that this is a sign that release has begun. You do not need to do anything else. Just do not turn away from that softness. That is where real healing happens. You do not need to search for peace. Peace is the natural state when nothing inside you is fighting against you. You do not need to wait for a perfect day to live rightly. You only need to remember what has always been true, that the light you are seeking is the same light looking through your eyes right now. I share these words, not as someone standing above you, but as someone who has walked those loops, carried those stones, and learned how to set them down. If I can set them down, you can too. Not in one day, but in many small, quiet, honest choices. And when you do, you will discover something that cannot be taken away. The inner sun never sets. The light within you never goes down. It is only waiting for you to remember and live with it.